It's after the way the universe really is and not what makes us feel good. And a lot of the competing doctrines are after what feels good and not what's true.
Okay, but you got to make, I'm not sure you'll go this far with me, but I mean, there's a lot of that that is about feeling good, and there's a lot of that that's about hocus pocus, but at the same time, there are millions of people who understand science does not prove religion, but because religion is faith-based, and therefore you should not deny the value of it because it is faith-based and not scientific.
But let's look a little more deeply into that. What is faith? It is belief in the absence of evidence. Now, I don't propose to tell anybody what to believe, but for me, believing when there's no compelling evidence is a mistake. The idea is to withhold belief until there is compelling evidence. And if the universe does not comply with our predispositions, okay, then we have the
You know, some people misunderstand withholding belief for disbelief. Let's continue.
a wrenching obligation to accommodate to the way the universe really is.
So you step forward to say, I deny all religion because I can't see it proved scientifically?
No. You see,
the value of religious experience and the value of reaching for higher experiences.
Let me say, religion deals with history, with poetry, with great literature, with ethics, with morals, including the morality of treating compassionately the least fortunate among us. All of these are things that I endorse wholeheartedly. Where religion gets into trouble is in those cases that it pretends to know something about science. The science in the Bible, for example, was acquired by the Jews from the Babylonians during the Babylonian captivity of 600 BC. That was the best science on the planet then. But we've learned something since then. Roman Catholicism, Reformed Judaism, most of the mainstream Protestant denominations have no difficulty with the idea that humans have evolved from other creatures, that the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, with the Big Bang. They don't have any trouble with that. The trouble comes with people who are biblical literalists, who believe that the Bible is dictated by the creator of the universe to an unerring stenographer.
And so therefore they...
And has no metaphor or allegory.
And from there they make their political and economic choices, and social choices.
And scientific.
And scientific choices. And scientific. And that's part of your problem with that idea.
Exactly.
It is that because for the wrong reasons we make the wrong choices about science.
That's right. So who is more humble? The scientist who looks at the universe with an open mind and accepts whatever the universe has to teach us, or somebody who says everything in this book must be considered the literal truth and never mind the fallibility of all the human beings involved in the writing of this book?
Okay, I mean, I accept that, but I also, the argument being made by many is that, you know, you don't have to, whether a specific scientific act took place as described by some biblical writer is not at the heart of the religious faith and the religious experience.
Some people agree with you and some people don't. Some people think that every job...
So this is the great Carl Sagan, the author of The Demon Haunted World and many other books, Cosmos, and the series on PBS that I grew up with. Great man of logic and reason. I have many other heroes of logic I'd like to show you, so let's keep going.
Jot and tittle in the Bible is essential. You throw one thing away to allegory or metaphor, then it's up to everybody to make their own decision.
Then how are we, a lot of this has to do with science in the United States. Are we different than other nations?
Absolutely not. You can see this worldwide. In India, there's a madness about astrology. In Britain, it's ghosts. In Germany, it's rays coming up from the earth that can only be detected by dowsers. Every country has its own specialties. We seem to be fascinated by UFOs right now. But one thing...
What is that? Before you leave UFOs,
right.
Tell me about you and Professor Mack.
John Mack is a professor of psychiatry at Harvard, who I've known for many years. We were arrested together at the Nevada nuclear test site protesting U.S. testing in the face of a Soviet moratorium on testing. And many years ago, he asked me, what is there in this UFO business? Is there anything to it? And I said, absolutely nothing, except, of course, for a psychiatrist. He is a psychiatrist. Well, he looked into it and decided that there was so much emotional energy in the reports of people who claimed to be abducted that it couldn't possibly be some psychological aberration, that it had to be true. He believed his patients. I do not believe his patients. Many of these stories are about waking up from a deep sleep and finding your bed surrounded by 3 or 4 short, dour, gray, and sexually obsessed beings, who then take you to their spaceship after they slither you through your wall and perform a variety of objectionable sexual experiments.
But here we have Dr. Carl Sagan, astronomer, versus Dr. what's his first name?
Mack.
John Mack. MD.
No question. So what's the problem?
He's a scientist.
How can scientists disagree?
He's a scientist.
Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm asking what do you think of this man coming to these conclusions?
I think he is not using the scientific method in approaching his issue.
And when you constantly, I assume you come at him with both barrels in conversation.
And in the demon-haunted world.
And he says?
He says, I don't appreciate the emotional force.
You don't.
Of these reports. But many people awaken from a nightmare with profound emotional force. That doesn't mean that the nightmare is true. It means something went on inside our head.
You were making a point before I jumped to John Mack.
Oh, yeah. What I wanted to say is, going back to the question of adequate evidence on something that's emotionally really pulling you. I lost both my parents about 12 or 15 years ago, and I had a great relationship with them. I really miss them. I would love to believe that their spirits were around somewhere, and I'd give almost anything to spend 5 minutes a year with them.
Do you hear their voices ever?
Sometimes. About 6 or 8 times since their death I've heard it. Carl, just in the voice of my father or my mother. Now, I don't think that means that they're in the next room. I think it means that
they're in your head.
I've had an auditory hallucination. I was with them so long, I heard their voices so often. Why shouldn't I be able to make a vivid recollection of it?
Here's what's interesting about this for me. You won't see this, but I'll throw it at you anyway. You convinced me a long time ago that it was arrogant for me or for anyone else to believe that there wasn't some life outside of our...
To exclude the possibility.
To exclude the possibility was an arrogance of intellect that we should not
I still believe
assume. You couldn't prove it, you didn't know it was there, but the arrogance for you...
Right, we don't know if it's there, we don't know if it's not there. Let's look.
And if you take that, why can't you say, there's a lot we don't know? There's a lot of power there that we don't know.
There's a lot we don't know.
You know?
It's what I believe.
But
that doesn't mean that every fraudulent claim has to be accepted. We demand the most rigorous standards of evidence, especially on what's important to us. So If some guy comes up to me, and a channeler or a medium, and says, I can put you in touch with your parents. Well, because I want so terribly to believe that,
Yeah.
I know I have to reach in for added.
Dr. Carl Sagan is one of the people that I grew up with, one of the greatest influences that I had in the 70s growing up. Before I went to university, this man who died, I think, in the 86, late 80s, I'd have to look it up, but one of the greatest influences of my life, and it led to other people who were also great influences in my life of logic. Christopher Hitchens, who I read everything he wrote back in the day. And I want to show you a video of him in a moment. And then we'll go to some other people. I want to show you some of the heroes of logic, because life is not always easy to accept on its own terms, but we have to accept it with logic. Now, there's a lot. I am completely against the left and what they're pushing, the woke bullshit. Now, while we embrace the politics of the right, which I do, I don't embrace illogical things. Religion. You can believe whatever you want, but realize that believing what you want to believe is not the same as comporting with reality, mirroring reality. And when I talk about reality, I'm not talking about the universe. There's something bigger than the universe. The universe is geography, right? Geography. We're not talking about geography. We're talking about reality, mathematics, everything that governs the reality we live in. Could there be other realities? Yes, quite possibly, but could we be in a simulation? A simulated reality of many, many billions, trillions of realities? Probably. We could be. We wouldn't know any different. The point is this, reality and the universe are two different things. So, but this was a man before he died for many years in my childhood who had made a great impression on me. And I just wanted, this was purportedly the last interview before he died. Great man. I read all of his books. And this led to future people in my life, future influences, and I wanted you to see. So let's keep going.
Reserves of skepticism, because I'm likely to be fooled and much more minor to have my money taken.
What was it, J.Z. Knight was it?
Yeah, exactly. She has a guy named Ramtha, who's 10,000 years old or
35.
Something. 35, yes. And he tells you lots of things, but nothing about what life was like 35,000 years ago.
Shirley MacLaine believes.
Shirley MacLaine believes that Ramtha was her brother.
Things like the Loch Ness Monster, and big, all that.
Again, is it
photograph?
Oh, fakes. I mean, the most famous photograph has now been shown to be a fake, but could there be a unknown mammal or even reptile of large dimensions swimming in in a Scottish lake? Sure there could. That we don't know about? Sure there could. Who says no?
But nobody.
But the evidence does not support it, does not demonstrate it. So do we say, oh, ridiculous?
Yeah.
No, we don't do that. We say unproved, which is a Scottish verdict.
Some reviewers differ with your conclusions on this point, that you seem to say it's growing, this kind of pseudoscience.
No, sorry to interrupt. I don't. This is part of being human. Humans have had this way of magical thinking through all of our history. The problem is that today the technology has reached formidable, maybe even awesome proportions. And so the dangers of thinking this way are larger. Not that this is a new kind of thing.
You are living with myelodysplasia.
Or I have been.
You have been. It's in remission. Or you have what?
Well, you know, with diseases of this sort and all cancers.
Cancer of the bone marrow?
It's myelodysplasia is not exactly cancer of the bone marrow, but if untreated, it inevitably leads to leukemia. And the trouble with all these diseases is you never know that you've got every last cell. You can only detect down to a certain level. But down to the level that anybody can detect, and in terms of how I feel and my stamina and all that, it seems to be gone. And I'm very lucky.
Because you had a sister who
my cystic
enabled
carry.
you to have a bone marrow transplant.
That's one, and also the enormous advances in in medical science in just the last few years. If I had had this thing 5 or 10 years ago, I would be dead sure as shooting. And then finally, the love and support of my family. All of those have played a central role.
So you're optimistic?
I'm very optimistic, or at least very hopeful.
And just share with us, because of your sense of language and your sense of understanding and being reflective and introspective, what do you think about, and what does it do for you to
I didn't have any near-death
say to you?
I didn't have any near-death experiences. I didn't have a religious conversion, but
you thought about what it would be like to die.
Certainly, and what it would be like for my family, and I didn't much think about what it would be like for me, because I don't think it's likely there's anything that you think about after you're dead.
That's it. Huh?
Yeah, long dreamless sleep. I'd love to believe the opposite, but I don't know of any evidence. But one thing...
Faith, Carl, faith.
One thing that it has done is to enhance my sense of appreciation for the beauty of life and of the universe and the sheer joy of being alive.
You had a healthy portion of that before this, but even you, it happens to.
Oh, there's no question.
Appreciation.
No question. Every moment, every inanimate object, to say nothing of the exquisite complexity of living beings. You imagine missing it all, and suddenly it's so much more precious.
May you live a long time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
Pleasure.
Same here.
Carl Sagan, Science as a Candle in the Dark. The title of the book is A Demon-Haunted World.
This is one of the greatest influences of my life. Now, this led to many encounters I had during my time in academia. Lawrence Krauss, who I would consider a science communicator successor to him, who I have had the honor of being friends with for a long time now. Richard Dawkins in biology, successor to Darwin, really. Many people. There's some people who are just masters of logic and of communication. Carl Sagan, Dr. Carl Sagan, great scientific communicator. Great scientist, well, of course, if you're valued on your papers or your great scientific discoveries, maybe not, but a great communicator. And I honestly think there's probably more value in bridging that gap, and what he offered in bridging the gap between the ultimate thinkers, the elite, and everybody else. For people like me who got into it because of somebody like him, then those who came up with your greatest theories, Einstein, of course, and certainly Newton, the greatest scientist ever. inventor of physics, calculus, not physics, but calculus. Anyway, so let's go on to one of the pure thinkers. And I'm talking about a journalist, a great author. One of my friends had, multiple friends of mine have had the opportunity to meet this man. I never did. But I loved him. I had actually talked with him, communicated with him in multiple emails, but we never actually met. So let's get to him.
Let's just get away from religion and let's talk about God. I believe in God because I figure if I'm wrong, I won't know. I'm kind of like hedging my bets. Isn't that the way most people believe in God, is because they figure if they don't believe it and they're wrong, they're screwed. If they believe it and they're right, they win.
That is what's known as Pascal's wager. Now, in my book, which you kindly featured, I restate the wager. I say, look, suppose I check out and I've been wrong all along and I'm suddenly in front of some chap who can sort of bar my way to the gates of paradise, where of course I want to go, because who wouldn't want to live for an eternity just praising God as if he was Kim Il-sung?
Mr.
Leave that to one side.
Christopher, we got to roll.
And he says, what the hell? And I say, look, you didn't give me enough evidence.
You got it.
Wouldn't he be nicer to me than if I'd been a hypocrite?
To Christopher is how you can justify wanting to take something away from people, from 95, that gives meaning to 95% of the American people, and replace it with something that gives meaning to just 5% of the American people.
Well, what an incredibly stupid question. First, I've said repeatedly that this stuff cannot be taken away from people. It is their favorite toy, and it will remain so. As Freud said in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on, and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys. Don't bring the toys to my house. Don't say my children must play with these toys. Don't say my toys might be a condom. Here we go again. Are not allowed by their toys. I'm not going to have any of that. Enough with clerical and religious bullying and intimidation. Is that finally clear? Have I got that across? Thank you.
Christopher, I've got to call you down on referring to circumcision as genital mutilation. My son cried more at his first haircut than he did at his bris. And statistically...
You weren't doing it right then.
Statistically, the only long-term effect that it seems to have on people is it increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
I can't find the compulsory mutilation of the genitals of children a subject for humor in that way, or flippancy in that way. Maimonides says very plainly that it's designed to repress sexual pleasure, to deprive us, a male child as far as possible of the opportunity of that. The full excision, not just the snip or the full mandatory covenant is fantastically painful, leads to trauma, leads to the dulling of the sexual relationship, and can be in itself life-threatening at that moment. We have the records, I can show them to you, of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in the United States of boy babies who've died or had life-threatening infections as a result of this disgusting practice. That a person as humane as yourself can sit here and think of that as a fit subject for humor shows what I mean. Religion makes morally normal people say and do disgusting and wicked things, and you've just proved my point for me. Shame on you for saying what you just said. Shame on you for saying it about your own son, my God.
Let's move on.
Yes, let's.
What next? Cutting the labia of little girls. At least Judaism doesn't do that.
This is a question.
What if a Muslim was to say to you just now, my little girl cried more at her first haircut than when I cut off her clitoris? What would you think of me if I was to say such a disgusting thing?
Well,
remember, we are not talking about detail here. We're talking about whether religion makes people behave better or not. Whereas to tell a child, you go to this church, which means you'll go to heaven, but your little playmates don't go to that church, and therefore will go to hell, seems to me to be an unpleasant thing to be saying. But
yes, that is.
Maybe I'm in a minority then.
That could be an unpleasant thing, but how do you develop?
Actually, an evil thing.
Let's call it evil, Christopher.
And something that only a religious person would dream of saying.
Let's call it evil. Where does evil come from?
Religion.
You know, I just wonder, you know, when you compare his life, you know, there are a lot of good atheist communists out there like Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot, and, you know, they slaughtered millions. Jerry Falwell slaughtered nobody in his life. He may have misspoke once or twice, but he devoted his life to his religion. Do you have nothing good to say about him at all?
No, I repeat, Jerry Falwell lived on hatred and superstition and bigotry. He preached dislike of people whose lives he knew nothing about. He raised money from credulous fools.
You don't know anything about his life.
Now, excuse me, sir. You can either ask me on and ask my opinion, or you may not. But I don't have to be here if you're going to take that attitude.
Well, you could leave.
You spent the first half by saying I had no right to the opinion you'd asked me on to express. Now, you're tiring me out. I repeat, though.
No, what I said is your opinion was thoughtless. What you wrote was crude and mean and hateful. That's what I said.
You took up all the time for my answer with your long, rather unlettered question.
Oh, okay.
Jerry Falwell just made...
To be an atheist, you have to believe that it is possible, which I think is a far greater leap of faith. That's something that can be created out of nothing. When you look at the majesty and sophistication and the intricacy of the universe that we do know and comprehend, you have to believe that somehow that this energy could have existed on its own, and I do not believe that is. That, to me, is a leap of faith.
You give me the awful impression, I hate to have to say it, of someone who hasn't read any of the arguments against your position ever. Now, I'm sorry, though, to have to begin by disagreeing with His Grace. If you're going to be a serious grown-up person and appear to defend the Catholic Church in public in front of an educated and literate audience, you simply have to start by making a great number of heartfelt apologies and requests for contrition and forgiveness. His Holiness on that occasion, it was March the 12th, 2000, if you wish to look it up, begged forgiveness for, among some other things, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the persecution of the Jewish people, injustice towards women, that's half the human race right there, and the forced conversion of indigenous peoples, especially in South America. And that followed a whole series of preceding apologies, or apologies, I would say, of a kind, made by the late Pope John Paul, who, it troubles me not at all to say, was a very impressive and serious human being. It followed no less than 94, count them, public recognitions on his part of appalling crime and error and cruelty and stupidity and offences to the free intelligence, ranging from, I shall be summary, like Bishop Marini, the African slave trade, apologized for in 1995, the admission that Galileo was right about the relationship between the sun and the earth and other orbs,
which came in 1992, one might add. No, I won't say. It's too easy to say better late than never. Here, I said it. To violence and torture, legalized torture. Torture was legalized and institutionalized by the Roman pontiff during the Counter-Reformation. That came in 1995. And for silence during Hitler's final solution, or Shoah, as well as, in 1999, coming in just under the Millennium Jubilee wire, an apology for the burning alive in the main square of Prague of the great Czech Protestant Jan Hus. But remember, this is from a church that, on the whole, cannot err. We still await a more direct admission. For example, I would give some suggestions of my own while we're at it. I would like them to take back the Concordat made with Adolf Hitler, the first treaty he ever signed, giving the church a monopoly over education in Germany in exchange for the dissolution of the Catholic Centre Party to give the Nazi Party a clear run. I'd have apologized for the Lateran Pact with Mussolini, myself, also the first treaty ever signed by that fascist dictator. I would also think I'd want to reconsider the fact that Father Tiso, head of the Nazi puppet state in Slovakia, was a priest in holy orders, that the Croatian fascist puppet state, the Ustaša state of Ante Pavelic, was also operating under full clerical protection and disguise, as was the regime of General Franco and the dictator Antonio Salazar. And I'd also want, I really think I would beg forgiveness for this, I don't think the German church should have asked Hitler's birthday to be celebrated from the pulpit every year until he died. These are very serious matters, and they're not to be laughed off by references to the occasional work of Catholic charities. But I draw your attention not just to the apologies, ladies and gentlemen, but to the evasive and euphemistic form that they take. Joseph Ratzinger, the current Pope, considered by some, by Catholics, to be the Vicar of Christ on earth, says of Indians, of the Indians who were massacred in the course of conversion in Brazil, after the apology had been made to them, he said, nonetheless, it must be remembered that before we came to convert them, they were silently awaiting the arrival of the church. I don't think that's a very genuine kind of apology to you. In his comment, one of the few he's made, on the institutionalization of rape and torture and maltreatment of children in Catholic institutions, he said, it's a very severe crisis which involves us, he said, in the following: in the need for applying to these victims the most loving pastoral care. Well, I'm sorry. They've already had that. And to say that this is the responsibility laid upon you by the horrific admission that you've already had to make is not accepting responsibility in any adult sense. I think that there will be an apology for what happened in Rwanda, the most Catholic country in Africa, one of the most Catholic countries in the world, where priests and nuns and bishops are on trial for inciting from their pulpits and on the church's radio stations and newspapers the massacre of their brothers and sisters. And the papacy was silent on this appalling occasion, and everyone in Rwanda knows it. And there hasn't yet been a properly written apology for that disgrace. Staying in Africa, I think it will one day be admitted with shame that it might have been in error to say that AIDS is bad as a disease, very bad, but not quite as bad as condoms are bad, or not as immoral in the same way.
There has probably, in my lifetime, not existed a mental powerhouse as great as Christopher Hitchens. He was a wordsmith, not a specialist in any science, but probably if logic, intellect, knowledge was the battleground, there would be nobody more feared than Christopher Hitchens. You have to read his books. You have to see his speeches. Truly one of the greatest intellects in my lifetime. Just incredible. There would be nobody more feared. I don't think anybody could withstand him. Albert Einstein could defeat him in the ground of mathematics and physics, but Christopher Hitchens, this is the knight of the mind that you would want in the forefront of your army. Next episode, we'll go over some more people.